It's just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey, everybody, welcome back to A Piece of Pie, the queer film podcast. Happy New Year. This is our first episode of 2023. And this week we're here to talk about The Whale, and I'm here with my friend Chris. Hi there.
Hello, it's good to be back.
Thanks. Welcome back. We had such a great talk last year about the power of the dog and straight actors playing gay, and it's kind of a recurring theme in our discussions. So coming into this sort of award season and knowing about The Whale, I remember I texted you the trailer and I was just like audible sigh. And you were like, I can't wait. And I was like, so I've had a lot of feelings on this movie before I even sat down to watch it. But today, as of right now, we're recording on January 10th. The Golden Globes just happened. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the Golden Globes and some surprises there. Right before I did the intro, we were talking about the host, Gerard Carmichael, I believe it is, and how funny he was. But was there any, setting all that aside, any major award that you were really surprised by, or even not a major award that you were surprised by?
I wasn't surprised by too many of the winners, but I was kind of surprised by how the tone of their win, like Steven Spielberg winning for Best Director and also for Best Drama with The Fabelmans. Like that's been my favorite movie of the year. I've put it as number one on my top 10 list, but it's such an obvious choice for like a film lover, especially someone who went to USC and took a class on Steven Spielberg, where he comes into the class, at the end of the class. And, it just was like, well, of course I love this movie. So I feel like it's hard to defend it. And Steven Spielberg is so renowned that like giving him a Golden Globe Award doesn't seem like such a special thing necessarily. But when he actually got up there and gave his speech and, made his case for how personal this film was to him, and kind of reminded at least me, and I think other people as well, that like, it's been a while since he actually won a lot of awards. He's nominated a lot because he's making great movies, every couple of years. They're almost always in the awards conversation. But it's been a long time since like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan, which are the movies that he kind of swept and won a lot of awards for. So I think he made a good case for why, it still feels good to give him some awards, even though, I mean, he's not someone who like needs more recognition necessarily, but for these movies, I just felt like the tone of seeing him win, and he was so grateful and everyone was so excited that it made it not feel like, oh, like Steven Spielberg getting another award for a movie about movies.
I didn't like it as much as you did. I actually it's a movie that when I saw it I did like, but I never really connected with emotionally. And I think that was kind of reflected in my like Letterboxd review and what I said at the time. But I read your Letterboxd review and other reviews, and they were also glowing, and I realized that there's a lot about the movie that works, and in fact, I can't think of anything about it that doesn't. But for whatever reason, I just didn't connect with Sammy and his story and that story. I saw it very much as while I was watching it. You see the kids like turning the corner, riding the bikes, and you're reminded of E.T. And you see these other, like he's looking at the heartbeat, and you're reminded of is it Raiders of the Lost Ark? There's all these weird little. It felt like sort of a prequel, like fan fiction-y to Spielberg kind of thing on my initial watch, but just in kind of like rethinking it and revisiting it, a lot of the heart comes through, and a lot of like the sentiment that I didn't connect with, and I still don't really connect with it, but I respect it, and I love Spielberg. He's a big reason for my love of movies, and for part of who I am. And I want to hear that story about when he was at your class. I didn't know about that, but we can save that for later.
I saw the movie twice, and it wasn't until the second time I saw it that it became like my number one movie versus like a movie that I liked and was probably, like lower down my list. And I think what you're saying about, connecting to Sammy is true. I think that it's because he like steps aside so much and lets the other characters be the central stage. And that's kind of what the movie is about him like realizing that he needs to like step aside and let other people be like the stars of the movie, and that his role in life is kind of the observer and the one who shapes the story versus the one who's starred in the story. And so I think when you first watch the movie, you're expecting him to be like the most dynamic character, and then once you've seen it already and you're watching it again, like you notice a little bit more the second time, like how he's actually like trying to recede from his own story, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, and the way he, well, spoilers, I guess, for the Fabelmans, but the way that whole scene at the end at the school dance after he's shown the movie to everybody and the guy reacts. I love that moment because you don't really feel like Sammy really even knows why he did it. Like he's just this, but this was just the story. That's, I don't know. It was the way it was constructed or something. I just thought it was really interesting how the bully kind of, for a moment, becomes the victim. I thought that was really great scene.
Yeah, that's the scene that also stuck out to me the first time, and I was like, I don't know what to make of the scene. I think it's really interesting, but it also reframes exactly what I was thinking about the movie, and I do think that scene actually ends up becoming kind of like the scene that kind of tells you what the rest of the movie is about in that way.
Yeah, I think the movie, you could almost in hindsight see the movie as like his journey to getting to that moment, to realizing that he's the storyteller and not the star.
Yes.
Because he probably could have very easily have made that movie about his friends or about himself, but he didn't. We'll have a lot more to say on the Fabelmans, I'm sure, for as the Oscars approach. I was real happy to see Michelle Yeoh win. I'm really super pulling for her. Mind you, as of this recording, no Oscar nominations have been announced. So if you're listening to this in the distant future, and they have been, and I'm wrong, and Michelle Yeoh hasn't been nominated, then number one, that's a crime. So there's that caveat. But I'm really gunning for her to win Best Actress. My number one movie of the year was The Banshees of Inisherin, which surprises me. I wasn't a fan of I haven't seen In Bruges. I wasn't a fan of McDonagh's other two films, Seven Psychopaths or
Three Billboards.
Thank you, Three Billboards.
The infamous Three Billboards that I'm like, I spent that whole award season like almost like I was practically like a full-time job campaigning against that movie because I hated it.
Yeah, I think you were definitely not alone in that. I didn't like that movie, and literally when I put on Banshees, I put it on because I knew it was in the award conversation, and it had just debuted on HBO Max. And I have this tendency sometimes, I try to see all of the Best Picture nominees, and I try to see as many movies as I can. But I was like, I hate when I get to like the 2 days before the Oscars and there's this movie that I've been putting off. And I'm just like, I don't even want to watch this movie. So that was like last on my list, but it happened to show up on HBO Max. And I was like, all right, I'll give this a shot. And 15 minutes in, I was hooked. Colin Farrell, I think it's the best performance it's my favorite performance of the year. I think he absolutely broke my heart in this movie. And because of that, and because of how much I thought about his character, like I couldn't shake him. And so I was like, as much as I loved Everything Everywhere All at Once, I was like, this is the number one because I can't stop thinking about this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I was coming into it with a slightly similar position as you, is because I hated that Three Billboards movie, and I was ready to like write him off as one of those filmmakers that I just like don't like. I liked In Bruges pretty well, but it's not like a favorite movie of mine. So I'd heard it was really good, so I tried to see it with an open mind, and I like a lot of movies, I did get to see it a little earlier before it was widely released. But yeah, I was really surprised at how much I liked it and how not like Three Billboards it was, how humane it was, like still obviously very edgy and dark in a lot of ways, but also it has a real soul to it, and it's really about something that I think, and it feels lived in and authentic, and I think part of that's because it takes place in Ireland instead of America, and McDonagh obviously knows that culture a little bit better than he knows I think the American Midwest, based
Right.
on Three Billboards. But yeah, that when you asked about surprises, and I think that could be seen as a bit of a surprise. I think it was pretty neck and neck between that or Everything Everywhere winning the best comedy award. Um, Banshees was coming in with, I think, the most nominations of any movie, so it has that going for it, and probably will get a lot of acting nominations at the Oscars too, because it just has one of those casts where everyone stands out, even the people who aren't going to be nominated, like the crone. People love to talk about her. So I think that is a movie that definitely this win, I think, positions it even stronger than it was for the Oscars. And when I first saw it, I kind of felt like, oh, this could even maybe be a Best Picture winner, because it's the kind of movie that has substance, but it's also fun to watch. It's a movie that there's not a lot to dislike about it. Like I haven't really talked to very many people who don't like the movie. They either like it or love it. It's on my top 10 as well. So I'm definitely, right there with you in terms of loving it and being surprised by it. So it wouldn't, it's still too early to say, it's going to win the Oscar, but I really feel like it's kind of slowly crept and is now kind of more quickly creeping, toward being one of the top few that could actually win Best Picture.
I feel like Best Picture is got to go to Fabelmans at this point. Like, I feel like Best Picture is the Fabelmans, and I think he gets Best Director again. Because you're right, it's been a long time since he's been nominated, and it's been a long time since or I guess it hasn't been that long since he's been nominated. The Post wasn't that long ago. But it's certainly been a long time since he's won, or even his movies have won, or actors in his movies have won. And so it does feel like almost a sort of victory lap of kind of just like he's made his ultimate like autobiography and his life story, and like it's about the movies and it's about love affair with movies, and it's from a director who has changed the landscape of cinema from when he started. And so yeah, I think it's his to lose. I think Everything Everywhere All at Once will get a ton of nominations, and my prediction is that it'll only win screenplay. I hope that it wins Best Actress. I think she's got a lot of love, and her acceptance speech, and you could tell she was so beloved tonight doing in her speech, that I'm slightly more optimistic now that she'll win than I was, when I woke up today.
Yeah, I think I would put like my money on Michelle Yeoh winning. And I think tonight really helped a lot, because like Cate Blanchett also won, but she wasn't there. So she didn't get a chance to like make a speech and kind of make a case for why giving Cate Blanchett her third Oscar would be, something that everyone wants to do. Pretty much everyone agrees that she's an amazing actress and is good in Tar. So it's not really a question of that. But when you see how different the narrative is when you give it to Michelle Yeoh, who's someone who didn't have, nearly as many opportunities and really struggled, and in her speech tonight, alluded to this, is that she recently turned 60. She's like an aging Asian actress, so she's not someone who you typically see, especially as the lead in an action movie. So I think that, yeah, seeing her win and Ke Huy Quan also win supporting actor, I think that movie is really strongly positioned to get those acting awards right now. And I think that's nice. Like Everything Everywhere is a movie I need to watch again. I've only seen it the one time. I'm sort of mixed on it. I like some things about it, and other things about it I felt were kind of, repetitive, a few jokes going on a little bit too long, but like the performances, like seeing those actors, and especially seeing them give those acceptance speeches, you realize how much this did not seem like something that was in the cards for them for a long time. They both, kind of alluded to feeling like they were counted out, and that they wouldn't be seeing this kind of opportunity again. So yeah, it was a really good feeling to see them get up there and win. And I think that'll only help their chances. And I think that's probably where the movie most deserves some wins would be for those actors.
Yeah, I agree. I think I said earlier that it wouldn't. I misspoke when I was saying it wouldn't win. I think it'll win. I'm hoping it'll win actress. Like I said, I kind of, you'd asked me a few hours ago, I have felt like it's Kate Blanchett's, like, she's so commanding in that movie, and it's such a powerful performance that I kind of thought that it was her, she had it in the bag. But like I said, watching it tonight, watching Michelle Yeoh's speech tonight, I'm like, okay, that's awesome. I want her to win because I think she's an incredible talent as well. And you're right, she hasn't had these opportunities. Kate Blanchett already has 2 Oscars. So
Yeah, and as far as the Fablemans being the front runner for Best Picture, I think I was also like a little bit diminishing like my investment in that movie and saying like, okay, well, I think it was like it peaked a little early. You know, it's been called the front runner for so long, and then when it came out, it didn't really do very much at the box office, and you know, it didn't have a ton of discussion out there. So I kind of felt like, oh, its moment had kind of left, and it was probably going to be another Spielberg movie that's nominated and doesn't win. So for me, it was nice to see it actually win tonight, and now I feel like it's actually back in amongst those top contenders, if not the front runner again. So yeah, I think tonight was an important night for kind of clarifying, you know, where these 3 movies, Banshees, Fablemans, and Everything Everywhere in particular, like where they kind of stand in terms of how likely they are to continue going through awards season and picking up some statues.
yeah. What about the TV stuff? Do you watch a lot of TV? Do you have any opinions on any of that? I admittedly, I don't think I haven't seen Ozark. I haven't seen the new season of The White Lotus. I just finished Severance, which I thought was fantastic. But a lot of that I hadn't seen, so I don't have a ton of opinions. But if we're talking about the Globes, I thought I'd ask.
I really liked seeing Mike White win, even though I haven't actually watched The White Lotus. I am a fan of his show Enlightened and some of his films. So, and Jennifer Coolidge, of course, was like hilarious a couple of times up on stage. So, I feel invested in that, even though I haven't seen the show. I know I like the show. So as soon as like movie season is over, I plan to actually watch White Lotus. And then the Ryan Murphy tribute. Ryan Murphy is not someone I would consider myself a big fan of, but I actually felt like the moment where he got up on stage for a kind of a Lifetime Achievement Award, the Carol Burnett Award, and called out a bunch of queer actors that he's worked with for being, you know, kind of brave enough to be out and to be, you know, not denying who they are just to, you know, in hopes of getting, you know, different kinds of roles in Hollywood or being more prominent. And I actually thought that was like very moving in a surprise move, because again, I haven't actually watched very many of his shows lately, because I think around the debut of Glee, I was kind of like, all right, I'm off the Ryan Murphy train. That was a little too much for me, but it at least made me appreciate his place in Hollywood and how many opportunities he has given to all kinds of diverse actors and a lot of like female actors who you know, had their kind of peak, you know, 20 years earlier, and then suddenly are back in these like great juicy roles in Ryan Murphy stuff. So say what you will about him, but I think he made a good case for himself as someone who's really kind of kept the door open for a lot of people.
I'm glad you
kept the door open.
I'm glad you brought him up, because I had forgotten about that. But you're right. I liked how much of his speech was spent thanking other people and crediting other people. And I appreciated too, honestly, my favorite thing was right at the beginning of his speech was, you know, MJ Rodriguez won last year, but it wasn't televised. So like, let's give her a standing ovation. That I thought was a really beautiful moment. And I think that shows I'm not a fan of his either. If you got off at Glee, that was early days. That was like, you must have got off that's like the 3rd stop.
I know. I watched Unpopular. I think that was his first show.
Popular.
Popular. Well, I guess to me it was an unpopular show. But yeah, I watched that. I watched Nip Tuck, and then things started going downhill. I think also pretty early. So I have checked in with a couple of things like the OJ series, and I watched a little bit of American Horror Story before it got completely kind of off the rails. But in general, I rolled my eyes at him, but you know, at least it gave me a you know, a moment to reconsider him, at least in certain ways.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a huge fan. I actually have like floated the idea of doing a Ryan Murphy episode around October because he does so much American Horror Story. He's like the certainly the biggest like queer horror creator maybe ever. And I question if that's good or bad sometimes. Because sometimes, and like the whole Dahmer thing being that whole like controversy. I actually watched all of Glee. It was when I was living in LA. It was when I knew you. I'm sure I like talked to you off about it at some point. I was a fan, foolishly, but it became this thing that like a core group of my friends were all just sort of this train wreck that we all couldn't turn away from. And I stuck with like I liked the Crime Story. I liked The People versus O.J. Simpson. I thought that was incredible. I really liked Impeachment. I really liked Versace. But then yeah, like the American Horror Story stuff, it's so over the top and ridiculous. And so I have a complicated relationship with him because I think he's at his best when he creates a show and hires and gives opportunities to queer people and creators and writers and actors and creators and writers and actors of color, and then steps back and goes and creates something else and then like lets them do it. Because I thought Pose was incredible, but he was hardly involved in Pose other than the pilot. And even by all accounts, The People versus O.J. Simpson, he was involved in a lot of the writing, but it was a pre-existing story, and it was basing it off of like a book. So I find I like him best when he's a little more removed from his own projects.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the writing definitely is hit or miss, and like the ideas for the shows are always great. Like you can always like see it on a poster. Like it's always a great idea. The casting is always great, and it's often like the story gets really, really messy, and especially with American Horror Story, where there isn't usually a template. I feel like often like the seasons would start out well, and then they just like go completely off the rails, as if he's just kind of like, you know, spitballing things without even, you know, like
Yeah.
he needs like someone who's gonna like edit his ideas a little bit.
Yeah.
Often. Yeah.
For sure. But at the same time, he's made hundreds of millions of dollars off Netflix, and his, you know, the Jeffrey Dahmer thing was their most watched show of all time. And so he's doing something right that people are clicking. It's clicking with people, even if it's not clicking with us. Anything more on the Globes, or should we swap over to The Whale?
Well, Brendan Fraser did not win the Golden Globe. You could say that for pretty obvious reasons.
Right. Yeah, that was another sort of that was something else I was thinking about, that because it went to Austin Butler, and that was really strange to me. But then I was like, well, it was not going to go to Brendan Fraser because he was so vocally not going to the ceremony. So like he was never going to get it. Do you think that Austin Butler winning that like changes the dynamic at all, like heading into the Oscars?
Maybe. I mean, there's been a lot of buzz about Elvis, which is surprising, I think, for most people who have seen Elvis.
He's the best part about Elvis.
Oh, for sure. And I think the industry really likes Elvis, so we'll see how that goes. You know, it reminds a lot of Bohemian Rhapsody, I think, which was also a pretty messy movie with a lead actor that was kind of like the standout of the movie. Obviously, Rami Malek went on to win Best Actor that year, so it definitely, I could definitely see it happening. I don't feel like Austin Butler, in the way that like we were talking about some of the other actors and their speeches kind of making a great case for them to win. I don't feel like his speech really did that. Like it didn't feel like an Oscar speech, if that makes any sense. You know, and I was like, is that his real voice? He's talking like Elvis. Is he still in character? It was kind of a weird moment where I was just like, I don't really know what's happening.
Is this still a performance?
Yeah, I guess if you want to prove that you're the best actor, you could just stay in character all through awards season. But
Now that would be a movie. There's a concept for a movie right there.
I mean, I wish Kate Blanchett would stay in character as Tar for just the next like several years and just like see where that character goes, because I think there's more story to be told there.
Yeah, like a Tar documentary, like I'm Not There or whatever. Like, just
yeah.
she starts doing interviews as Lydia Tar.
Just randomly attacking people every time she gets to an event.
That's another good idea. Hollywood, we've both written some screenplays, so give us a call.
Ryan Murphy, are you listening?
Right. Oh God, could you imagine? He would have turned it off long ago. He would have been like, they're talking shit about me. Whatever. I watched every stupid episode of Glee. Like, come on, Ryan Murphy.
Hey, I watched every episode of Nip Tuck. I was on the train like very early on, a very vocal Nip Tuck supporter. I think I recapped most of the seasons of that like on LiveJournal at the time, because it was
amazing.
Mid 2000s.
Yeah,
so I helped make him the man that he is, for better or worse.
Yeah, exactly. And I watched all those episodes of Glee. I can't tell you how many singles I bought over the years. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not that embarrassed. Anyway, we're gonna take a quick break. We're gonna you can listen to the trailer for The Whale, starring Brendan Fraser and Sadie Sink and Samantha Morton, which surprised the hell out of me, and it's always nice to see her. But we'll see you on the other side.
I know these rules can feel constraining, but remember, the point of this course is to learn how to write clearly and persuasively. Think about that. Think about the truth of your argument. You're an amazing person, Ellie. I couldn't ask for a more incredible daughter.
Are you actually trying to parent me right now?
Who would want me to be a part of their life?
You don't stay in touch with Mom?
She really only tells me things about you.
Why?
Because that's all I want to know about.
Why'd you gain all that weight?
Someone close to me passed away, and it had an effect on me.
You haven't seen her since she was 8 years old, and you're gonna reconnect with her?
Sorry.
I don't like this. This isn't a good idea.
I'm sorry.
You say you're sorry one more time, I will shove a knife right into you. I swear to God.
Go ahead. What's it gonna do? My internal organs are 2 feet in at least.
Why do you suddenly need to see her so bad? Why now?
Liz. I'm worried that she's forgotten what an amazing person she is. I need to know that she's gonna have a decent life where she cares about people and that she's gonna be okay. I need to know that I have done one thing right with my life.
All right, we're back. We're here to talk about Brendan Fraser. I probably am going to be saying his name correctly and incorrectly and off and on. So I apologize in advance. I just saw the movie today. I gave it 1 star in my Letterboxd review. I believe, Chris, you were 4.5. So here, take off the gloves. So no, tell us about The Whale.
So Brendan Fraser stars as Charlie. He is a professor who teaches remotely, but always keeps his webcam off. And he weighs, I'm not entirely sure what the number is supposed to be. I think something like 600 pounds. Anyway, a lot. He's so obese that he can barely move around. And his health is deteriorating pretty much intentionally, and he decides to use what he believes are his final days to reconnect with his daughter. There's also a missionary from a church a church described by some in the movie as a cult, who keeps coming by trying to save him. So yeah, it is based on a play by Samuel Hunter, and it takes place pretty much entirely in and around the apartment. So it's very contained and very theatrical in that way.
Yeah, it's all pretty much on that one set in his apartment, which means characters kind of come in to tell him things and leave and go experience these outer lives that we're not privy to, and then return to tell him more things. So the reason I wanted to talk about it is there seems to be this trend lately, it's not even lately, but of straight actors playing gay for Oscar glory. Tom Hanks, Sean Penn, Jared Leto, Matthew McConaughey, Brendan Fraser, Rami Malek, as we were discussing, straight actors playing gay and winning awards. And like I said, I sent you a text when this trailer dropped, already kind of dreading it, and because of the conversations that we've had, and I love the dialogue, honestly. Like it's a never-ending conversation, but yeah, it just seemed like another sad bastard gay movie with this former star, not child star, but trying to regain some glory. And it's a good performance. It is probably one of his best performances. I found the movie around him, though, to be dour and depressing, and like I said, nothing really seems to happen. Everything's happen. People tell him that things have happened. He doesn't affect anything. He's a very passive character in a lot of ways. So I had a lot of issues with it for that reason. And I just saw it today, and a lot of it, and I'll confess, like I said, I came into it not really expecting to like it. So maybe I'm a little biased, but it did feel like he's just another tragic queer character that dies to inspire others.
Yeah, I guess for one, we should confess, I had no idea what your opinion would be before this, other than, as you said, you texted me like or something like that months ago. So I knew you were predisposed to dislike the movie, at least, but I did not know after you saw it whether or not that opinion would have changed. But yeah, I mean, it does feel like we're definitely starting in the same place as the Power of the Dog conversation. And I think, obviously I am the passionate defender of
well, again, I appreciate the conversation.
Miserable queer people dying.
Right. But I love that conversation, and it's a never ending conversation. And every time a new movie comes out, we continue it, I think. I mean, obviously we're not going to do every single movie. Who has the time? But I just think, like I said, I wanted to have you back on to talk about it because I enjoyed the conversation last year. And I do think that it would be super boring if we both loved it or we both hated it too. Wouldn't make a very interesting conversation. I will say, like I said, I thought he was fine in it, but I think that, to my mind, like, Brendan Fraser is not known for being a good actor, in my mind, and he never has been. I remember being like 19 or 20 when The Mummy came out, and thinking at 19 or 20 that, God, the special effects look terrible. Like, I can't believe this is a major movie. And it still looks even worse now. I understand, though, that there's people who grew up with it. If you're very, very young when it comes out, it's a rollicking adventure. And I can understand sort of a fondness for it, because I have those movies as well. Like, I have a fondness for bad movies that I loved growing up. But what's wild is that he always sort of played these doofuses that were like, what did I say in my Letterboxd review? Doofuses and fish out of water comedies, like Encino Man, George of the Jungle, Blast from the Past. Yeah. Just I just never have found him a good actor. So from the moment he was being applauded and giving a standing ovation, and everyone was saying, "Oh, it's his comeback," and I'm like, no, but he's not good. He's not a good actor. I think he's good in this. I think he does have a sort of low key kind of charisma that gets you through those doofus roles or action roles, but that doesn't always translate to being a talented or good actor.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting place to start talking about this movie, because I think that's where, you know, almost everyone who's listening to this probably comes into it, is from hearing about his performance and hearing it before seeing it, because it's been buzzed about for a really long time. And I have always found the narrative around it a little odd, because I agree with you, is like, he's a likable actor and he's in a lot of likable kind of movies, you know, like silly movies, but he has not been in very many like great films. And even if he is in you know, a more esteemed film, he's usually a smaller part in it. You know, hasn't been really like the dramatic lead of like, you know, a Oscar caliber movie, I don't think, ever, until now. And so I mean, I get why people are interested in him and interested in seeing him come back, as, you know, just as someone who's in, you know, sort of the cultural conversation. But I have always felt it weird that it would be considered like a comeback kind of Oscar run, because he never really had much of an Oscar run to begin with anyway. He was in Gods and Monsters back in, I think, 98, which was a kind of a queer interest movie with Ian McKellen playing James Whale, the director of Frankenstein, and he played the straight gardener that kind of inspired Whale in terms of this movie's narrative. I'm not sure how true that is, but kind of inspired him a little bit while he was making those movies. And I think that was kind of like his biggest Oscar moment really to date. He was, you know, part of the ensemble in Crash, which won Best Picture, but no one was talking about his performance in particular in that movie. So yeah, so I think I was looking forward to this movie because I love Darren Aronofsky. I really am always excited by what he's doing, because I think he takes a lot of risks as a filmmaker and makes movies that feel that kind of like, you know, one of his last movies, I think, was his last movie, Mother, a movie that was basically daring people to hate it, which a lot of people did. But I feel like he does that with his movies a lot. He takes big risks and doesn't necessarily like make concessions to try and, you know, make sure that he pleases every audience. So I'm a big fan of Darren Aronofsky. And I had read the script back in May, so I knew what the story was going to be. And so I knew, you know, that I connected to the material at least. But as I was worried a little bit about coming into it, and I was like, is Brendan Fraser going to be able to pull off this role? Because it's a really difficult part on the page. There's a lot of, it's a very interior part, you know, it requires him to express a lot just on his face, because he's barely moving around. You know, he's mostly like sitting on a couch in the movie. And, you know, it all has to be in the character in kind of a very still performance, because there isn't a lot of like moving around or action to distract you from what the character is saying or feeling. And I really was a little worried that he wouldn't be able to pull it off, and I really wasn't invested in like his performance as the narrative of the movie, which I feel like everyone else, that's kind of what everyone is talking about, is like, oh, it's Brendan Fraser and he's doing this performance, and we really want to see him, you know, kind of rewarded for his career. And I was coming to it almost from an opposite point of view, where I was like, I don't really care about any of that. I like Brendan Fraser fine, but I don't necessarily have a burning desire to see him, you know, winning a bunch of awards, you know, based on his career so far. And I was just interested in it as a story and as an Aronofsky film. And to me, Fraser was kind of incidental. I did end up being really impressed by Fraser's performance, and I think he is probably my favorite male lead of the year. Although I'd like to also shout out Colin Farrell from Banshees, and Jeremy Pope in The Inspection, I think, is also really great. So there are a few like really great ones, but I was kind of blown away by this performance, even after it being so hyped up. And then I think there's like a backlash. A lot of the backlash was based even on people who didn't see the movie yet. But, there was all this discourse around it already before I'd even seen the film. And I was still like, oh, I get it. Like, I actually was so invested in this character. And I think even though he's not physically, I mean, obviously it's a physical role because he's wearing a bunch of prosthetics, but in terms of like, again, like moving around and that he's not doing that much on screen. He's mostly sitting there and emoting. And yet I really feel like he was great at bringing you into this character just kind of through the eyes and the face. And even, for a drama, there's not that many like big moments of like he cries, once or twice, there's a couple of those kind of moments, but it's not like a lot of like big monologues or getting like very angry and very sad. And, it's a pretty consistently like tempered character throughout. And even like a pretty like kind of wryly funny character. At a lot of times, like he has a self-deprecating quality that I think, especially with his friend, played by Hong Chow, who is also kind of a nurse to him. They have like a funny rapport a lot of times. And so I thought he did a really good job of like filling out this character and humanizing him without a lot of the tools that you would normally have, which would be like moving around the set and having props and kind of gesturing a lot. He didn't really have a lot of those tools at his disposal and still was able to create a character that I ended up caring quite a bit about.
I'm glad you mentioned Hung Chow. I think she's probably my favorite performance in the movie. I thought she was fantastic. If a little underwritten, but I felt like she brought a lived-in sort of feel to this character where you could sense the sort of exhaustion that she's had from dealing with Charlie and dealing with, you find out later her brother was his partner, and like she dealing with that and dealing with their parents and the religious toxicity of that. I wanted to go back to reference something, not go back to, but I wanted to reference something that you mentioned in it was a line or something I think that you put in your review, but it's possible to watch this movie without feeling disgusted by Charlie, which I thought was interesting because I wasn't personally, but I felt like watching it that Darren Aronofsky was like disgusted by this character. And I felt like he wanted me to be disgusted by this character.
Why? I've heard that a lot. I think that's kind of like the movie has not done all that well, like with critics overall. And that's kind of the narrative that keeps coming back. And I just don't, it's one of those things where like you read it and you're just like, what movie did you watch? Like, so I just want to hear, like, are there specific
anytime he's seen eating he's eating pizza or he's eating a sandwich, it's presented sort of middle of the frame. Also the framing, the 4:3 aspect ratio and like shrinking the screen that way, it feels like he's doing that so that when Brendan Fraser is on screen, he's taking up so much of the screen. That aspect ratio is not something that I like generally give a lot of consideration to in movies, but it was the first thing I noticed when this movie started because I've been watching trailers and all of a sudden it shrinks and you're like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if it's going to go back. And then it doesn't. And so that was one, just the framing of that. But I also felt like whenever he was eating, like I said, he eats a sandwich and eats some pizzas, and it's presented with this like dour music. It almost reminded me of like Nat Geo videos of like predators hunting their prey. Just this like down, dark, just sort of tense music. And it's presenting that he's eating this pizza and like shit's getting all over his shirt and it's falling on the ground. And it's like this exaggerated way of like he's eating pizza, but it's like who eats pizza by putting two slices on top of each other like that? But there was also it felt theatrical and it felt fake watching him eat.
Wow. I mean, I think that I'll just quote myself from Letterboxd again.
That's okay. I've done it before.
I don't hate to quote myself. I'm lying. I like to quote myself, but just acknowledging that it's a little ridiculous. But one thing I said in my review is The Whale isn't about obesity any more than Black Swan is a film about a shard of glass. And that's kind of how I feel about his eating and his weight that are so much a part of the conversation of this movie. And I feel like take up very little actual time. There are a couple of scenes where he's eating, and that's pretty much it. And there's one that is kind of like a binge scene that is a very dramatic scene. So, but it's like one scene in the movie. It's not the entire movie, which I feel like a lot of the criticism makes it sound as if like the whole movie is like watching him like gorge himself. But anyway, what I mean by that is that like he is a suicidal character, and I find this to be like a really great film about depression, and the aspect ratio that boxes him in is, I think, part of that. Is like it's a very claustrophobic film, all taking place inside this apartment. It's a very dreary film. Like it's always raining outside except for in the last scene, which is going for like a very different feel. But I think it really captures the state of mind of this character, which I think is what a lot of people are responding to. Is it is a very heavy, very sad mindset, because he's so depressed, and there are all these people that kind of keep breaking through to him, but in the end are coming out or are leaving him, and he always at the end of it is always alone. And I feel like that really encapsulates the feeling of depression, of just kind of being trapped with yourself. And I think his weight is a part of that as well. That it like makes it much more difficult for him to even get out of the apartment should he want to, or change anything about his life. At least at this point, he really can't do that. And with the eating, is I feel like it's the weapon he's chosen to commit suicide with. And so when we're seeing him do it a couple of times, or we're reminded that he's so obese that he's about to die, we should say, I guess, that he has he's experiencing heart failure when the movie starts. So that's kind of hanging over his heads and like our heads as viewers over the movie. I feel like it's the same as if you were showing a character that we know is depressed and probably suicidal. If you were showing him like with a gun, it's giving us that sense of tension. And it's kind of showing us that like he's in a state of mind where he's thinking about death, that he's chasing death. And the binge eating sequence in particular like comes at a moment where I think he's just trying to get his life over with as quickly as possible. And so it is not at all like supposed to be a movie that like speaks widely to what other obese people, like how they eat, or that these habits are something that anyone else who isn't this specific character would engage in. But it's because he is so depressed and wanting to die that he is kind of doing it in this very extreme way.
Yeah, I definitely got that. I just felt like it did it in a way that it actually and I should say that, like, by and large, I am an Aronofsky fan as well. Black Swan is one of my favorite movies. I loved Requiem for a Dream when I saw it, and I haven't seen it since, but I also feel like it's burned in my memory. Like I don't need to see it. So I'm a fan. I didn't see Noah. I think that's the only one I haven't seen. Mother, I was kind of in the middle on. I need to revisit it. And I actually bought a copy of it because we were going to discuss it for the podcast, but we haven't gotten around to it yet. But if we do, I'll let you know.
I'll say, watching Mother, I think I rewatched it most recently, like at some point, like pretty early in the pandemic, and I was like, actually, this is kind of just now a documentary about the way things are. It was just a little bit earlier, but like just the kind of chaos and miserableism of it, horrific miserableism, I felt like was just like, oh, now we just live in this world.
Yeah.
But anyway,
like I said, I'm a fan of Aronofsky, and I mentioned this to quote myself again. in my Letterboxd review, this movie brings to mind his other works, because it feels like, in a way, it feels like he treats Charlie with the same sort of disdain that he treated, I don't remember her character's name, but Ellen Burstyn in Requiem for a Dream, or the same sort of indifference that he felt like with The Wrestler. And also, I don't want to jump ahead, but this and The Wrestler have like this identical endings, essentially. But and he chronicles this like sort of this grotesquerie of like of humanity, of things that you don't usually see, of like injuries, right? Like you see like the half rotted arm of a junkie in Requiem for a Dream, or like Mickey Rourke is like pulling staples out of his back and like, you know, getting beaten to within an inch of his life. And he shows all of these sort of, and at no point in any of those movies, nor in this with Charlie, I guess it all just feels like he looks down on all of those characters.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I mean, and I think that's why I love his movies, is that I see what you're saying, is that there's a certain, they're not warm movies by any means.
Yeah,
They're
he just puts his
pretty-
characters through this hell. And like,
yes.
And I feel like this movie in particular, and Requiem for a Dream in particular, maybe less so The Wrestler, because I do think that even after I said that, I was like, no, I feel like the guy in The Wrestler, he likes, but certainly Requiem for a Dream, and this one, it feels like he's like, look at how disgusting and pathetic these people are. Look at what they've done to themselves, and it's looking down on them.
Yeah, and I've heard that, and I feel like that is a lot of projection of people who are actually themselves looking down on the characters, because I don't feel that at all. I watched this movie and I feel that it has such empathy for him. And so that's why I obviously there are a lot of people feeling this way, and I think they feel that way about a lot of his films. You know, even going back to Requiem, people felt that it was kind of a pitiless movie. And I guess I have a different approach to those kinds of movies, where I feel like it gets me closer to them because I'm experiencing a lot of the pain that they are feeling. And the movie is so intense that I am feeling that as well. And that makes me feel close to the character, not that I'm sort of apart from them, judging them, or that Aronofsky is, but that he's feeling it with his characters and making his audience feel it along with them as well. So I feel like it's almost a form of being kinder to them by sharing that pain with other people versus making them go through it alone.
I just feel like in both cases, the score and the way it's framed, it like that Clint Mansell score and Requiem for a Dream, like, is just, I don't want to impersonate it because I'm not a musician and whatever else. Maybe I'll find it on YouTube and I'll put it in for a second. But I just find it so fierce and like imposing and judgmental and all of those things. And like I said, I say this as someone who at the time I saw it liked Requiem for a Dream, although I haven't seen it since because it's such a difficult watch. I guess I just don't. I see what you're saying when you mentioned that he's going through this with the characters and you feel connected to them in that way. I think for me, something about it, I miss that. I can see what you're saying, but I miss that connection, and I don't, because I feel like he does. It feels to me like he doesn't want us to empathize with them. I feel like these characters are. Like The Wrestler, like the house he puts him in, and like his whole like all of his surroundings and everything is just really dirty. And Pi too, everything is just grungy and gross, and it feels like I said, it feels like he's detached from it and he's sort of looking down at these people.
Yeah, I think it's hard if you're a filmmaker to actually look down upon the characters that you create. And this is, obviously more of a meta conversation about, art and how artists feel about their characters. But I think that's like, as someone who writes as well, like just knowing that you have to put yourself in the character's shoes, and you really do, in a diminished way, have to experience what they experience to create a character and to think about their world and their life. So and I can definitely, like, this is really helpful for me to, I think, understand where some of this criticism is coming from, hearing having this conversation and hearing you talk about it. But I do see this such as a piece with his other films, particularly The Wrestler and Black Swan, which are both also about characters who their body is becomes kind of a very big part of the movie. In The Wrestler, he is an aging wrestler who is also experiencing heart problems and has to basically either quit or risk basically dying in the ring. And in Black Swan, she's a ballerina, and also age is a big thing with both of them, and I think is kind of in this movie too, in a more subtle way, that these characters are all kind of reaching a point where they feel like they are becoming obsolete, and like they had this kind of moment of glory. In this movie, it was his relationship with Alan, the character who's committed suicide, probably a couple of years, I believe, before this movie starts. And then, in The Wrestler and Black Swan, it's their careers, as they had this sort of moment in the sun, and that moment is gone. And these characters are all choosing to kind of bring the finish line closer to themselves, basically with suicide or with really reckless behavior. And so I see this film as such a piece with those. And so it kind of, these are criticisms that people have lobbed at other Aronofsky movies as well, but it feels a little bit like it's really extra for this movie. And I think part of that is just where the culture is right now. But also feels a little bit like, I think that we as a culture still have a lot to like figure out about accepting different body types. Like, obviously we're making a lot of strides to accept different kind of people and have more diversity in all kinds of different ways. And that's one that I feel like, we're not super advanced in that sense, as a culture. And I feel like some of the response to this movie is what is almost like the movie is almost a bit of a challenge to people. Like, can you see past this? Like, this movie, a big part of this movie is this essay that gives the movie its title, which is, the daughter wrote this essay in 8th grade about Moby Dick. And it's a device of the movie that Charlie keeps reading this essay over and over and thinks it's a really good essay. And the reason he thinks that is not because it's like particularly like astute or academically sound, but because it's emotionally honest, and it's someone who is really engaged with the material and is talking about how they feel. And that's another thing that he keeps saying to his students is like, I want you not to tell me, don't regurgitate ideas from Wikipedia. Don't try and tell me something like really high-minded, but just engage emotionally with this and tell me what you feel. And in a kind of ironic way, I feel like people are doing the same thing with this movie. Is they're not engaging with it emotionally. They're kind of regurgitating ideas that they heard on Twitter, or this sort of like mass sort of reaction to this movie that before they even watched the movie themselves, they're judging it the way that Charlie himself is being judged, instead of, kind of giving it a chance and engaging with it.
So to take with what you were saying, I wanted to kind of take that a little bit and kind of pivot. We are the Queer Film Podcast, and we are the reason I wanted to discuss this movie was because it's another sort of Oscar contender and things like that. So what are your thoughts on how it handles his sexuality and the idea of Brendan Fraser playing gay?
To address like him playing gay, I think in this movie it's even less problematic than it might be in, say, Power of the Dog or something else, because it would be so difficult to find a gay actor who also can play this role, who also either is, there's been, also some criticism of it for not casting like a larger actor or something. And to find someone who is exactly this person would be incredibly difficult. And I think that his sexuality is a very, very important part of this movie and this story that isn't actually being talked about very much. And yet I also feel like it's a very minor part of the performance, if that makes any sense. Which isn't to say it doesn't kind of infuse his whole character, but because of the specificity of the role of it being, someone who is 600 pounds or something like that, and that there's so much else going on that you really need someone who can pull off the role, who can, pull off financing for the movie. It really doesn't bother me at all, and I think he does a great job of playing the character and feeling really empathetic in a way that, like, I think traditionally, like, performing as gay has felt like a bit of a stunt in certain ways, like William Hurt in Kiss of the Spider Woman. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't,
like,
but I've seen clips, so I know, his performance, and
or Jared Leto in Dallas Buyers Club. It's being gay is the performance in a way, or being queer in some way, dressing as a woman, or behaving in a, like, that is kind of what gets them the award, is that they are, and I think kind of seen as brave for, like, like a straight man daring to be more feminine in one way or another. And I think that it has shifted from that to not feeling brave in that way anymore, and that this movie doesn't really have any of that. So to me, it feels a little bit less like in those movies. It's like, it seems like it would be a very good idea to cast a queer actor in those roles, and I think if those were made today, that they would be, because then it's less, performative, and it's more just like ingrained in who the character is. But for this, that just isn't so much of a concern, is that it's a different kind of performance, I guess, and it's really less based on particular, like, body language or stuff that would signal that he's queer.
Yeah, he doesn't play it. He doesn't play it gay, quote unquote, in that way.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this when we did I Love You, Philip Morris, and how, like, Jim Carrey, like, when hearing about it, and I think too, hearing about this, I kind of dreaded that Brendan Fraser would take on these affectations and have it with a limp wrist and everything like that. I think in both cases, the fact that they don't, I think, improves the performance. Hypothetically, so this play is about 10 years old. I don't know if you've seen the play. Do you think that had it been made 10 years ago, that someone might have been a little more limp-wristed about it? Do you think maybe we've made strides, like maybe queer and gay people are enough in everyone's lives that everyone kind of understands that, yes, those stereotypes still exist and they always will, but do you think that we're getting to a place where maybe those aren't always the easy go-to?
I hope so, and I'd like to think that this play, which I didn't see, but would have handled this differently. And I think it's a lot if you add that on top of the character already, because there's already so much going on with like the prosthetics and everything that like that I think could go wrong like really easily. But yeah, I think it definitely would have been, I think that if they didn't do it, there would have at least been people like, well, how do we know he's gay? Like, doesn't he have to have like a lisp or a little more of a limp wrist? Like, I think there would have been at least someone who said that or thought that. Hopefully they would have been talked down from that even back then. But I do think this play and the movie version of it does have its feet in a culture from 10 years ago and is speaking more to where things were then than they are now. But the movie, I think, takes place in like 2015 because there's stuff on the TV about like Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump. So
yeah, it's like the primaries.
Yeah. So I think the movie is already like, gosh, that's a lot longer ago than I thought it was, like 8 years ago now, in the past.
I know.
But you know, culture has changed a lot in the last like 20 years. And so I feel like this play is very much, a lot of it is about religion and religious intolerance. The missionary character is a big character. And I haven't looked into a lot about the writing of it, but I know that the author, it's very personal to him. And he also, like this character is in some ways like kind of a proxy for him. So the playwright has experienced a lot of these issues himself. And I think that it is probably speaking to a lot of stuff he dealt with, 10 or 15 years ago, versus, exactly where culture is today. But I also was around 10 or 15 years ago and, obviously not dealing with everything in this movie, but the culture of judgment that I think this movie takes kind of place in, it takes place in like rural Idaho. So it's not a place that I've spent a lot of time lately, especially, but it's a more, conservative mindset. And I think is responding so much to, it obviously still exists, but where culture was, back when we were still having votes about like Prop 8 in Los Angeles, basically like, was gay marriage going to be banned or not? And it feels like it kind of comes out of that place of religious intolerance. And I think that's such an important part of this character that I feel like has really gone under discussed while everyone is kind of focused on his physical appearance and the kind of weight issues, is that there's a whole lot more to this character. And the whole reason behind his weight is that I kind of see him as someone who like is this large because he has ingested all of the intolerance and shame and judgment of, in this story, basically the religious group, and just religion in general, like the judgment, but also his daughter and his ex-wife. They're also very judgmental of him. They have, their personal reasons for being angry at him for, kind of breaking up their family and choosing to live life with his boyfriend instead of, kind of keep the hetero family unit together. But, his daughter uses the word faggot, for example. It's like, these are not people who are super understanding about the fact that he needed to, kind of figure himself out, and that he maybe made a mistake by marrying a woman and having a child in this marriage, and hadn't had the opportunity to, really figure himself out until a certain point when he met his boyfriend and then decided to pursue his own happiness. But they're very judgmental about that. And that is kind of echoed in this sort of larger religious context. And like part of the reason why the story needs to be about someone who is as large as he is that like many religious people would call him a deviant or disgusting, pick your pejorative, and that like the character then kind of takes on the role that people see him as. Like he becomes something that people find disgusting because he's already been labeled disgusting by the people in his life. And so I feel like he's really internalizing a lot of that hate and shame. And so the physical, kind of reflects that. And so I find that to be a really, like, and that's specific to him being a gay man, like this, it wouldn't be the same movie or the same character if that wasn't the catalyst for why he gained all this weight in the first place, is feeling that shame. And so when I hear a lot of the criticism of this movie, I am not hearing, a lot of times they don't even mention that he's a gay man, let alone all this kind of context. So that's one reason I was really interested in coming on the podcast, because I knew that would be an aspect that we could discuss on. And I feel like it's one that just hasn't really been discussed very much about this movie.
Well, one of the things that struck me about the movie, and I've seen this a lot in queer films that we've discussed over the years on this podcast, his sexuality and his homosexuality, frankly, is treated like something that happens to straight people, and how it's such an inconvenience for them, and it's ruined their lives, and they're angry at him. Now, you don't get there's a lot of subtext in there where it's been 8 years, so you don't find out a lot about, like, well, what specifically happened that she wouldn't let him even be in touch with her and with his daughter, but you really get the sense, because it's in rural Idaho, that it was a gay thing. And so one of the things that, like I said, was something that struck me about the movie, is that it's not a character trait for Charlie, it's a hurdle for them to overcome.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's something that I wrestle with watching this movie too, which the daughter character in particular is so aggressive, and I want to say there are things about this movie that I don't love, like I certainly have criticisms of it, and that character is one of them. And I think I've had to wrestle with that, because she is so rude to him. And I think part of that is the setting, part of that is the time, but part of it maybe could have been acknowledged in a different way to set this movie when it is. But yeah, so the part of the story is that Charlie thinks his daughter is an amazing person, and the mother thinks that she is evil. That is a quote. Yeah. And the daughter is constantly doing things that are pretty cruel, or she drugs her dad, she gives him Ambien, she takes recordings and photos of people and puts them online with like really burning statements, and she eventually tells this missionary's family that he stole a bunch of money. Like, she records him making a confession and like sends it to his church, and it's unclear, especially to Charlie, whether she was trying to do something nice for him by kind of fixing his problem, or if she was just being kind of an evil person who's messing with him. Charlie comes around to thinking that she was trying to help him, and in general, his worldview is so positive. It's almost insanely positive, and that is certainly not my worldview. I don't think it's much of the audience's worldview. And in that way, he becomes kind of Christ-like. Is like, he is so forgiving of these people that I think he has every right to be very angry at and judgmental of. And I want to see him yell back at his daughter or his wife and say, hey, like, I'm sorry, that this inconvenienced you, but I have a right to live my life and pursue the life that I want. So I wrestle with the same thing that you do, is I'm okay with feeling that Charlie is wrong to kind of view his daughter in this positive light. And I actually think it's kind of tragic that he is so forgiving of her. when all I want to do is see him like take the money away from her and give it to Hong Chow because she is such a better person. And I think his daughter is awful, but
Yeah.
and so, but so that is to say that I really do see what you're saying about that attitude being kind of pervasive, because there are so many characters and the movie doesn't make it clear that we're supposed to think these characters are wrong. Like you could almost see it as these characters are correct to be angry at him for having left the family. And I guess, you know, your mileage may vary, but I feel like he did do the right thing and that these characters are kind of being awful to judge him for it.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and again, there's an 8-year period that we're not even really privy to at all. But I also think that you could make an argument that, like, yes, I agree with you. He was absolutely right to leave his wife if he realized that he was in love with someone else. But I also think that, again, we're speculating because it's not in the movie, but it seems as though there would have been room for him to still try and sort of make amends in those 8 years. But you kind of get the impression, yeah, that like he didn't have an opportunity to, because she was so like, no, like, oh, you're gay, that's disgusting, I don't want you to see my daughter. But you don't really know that, and it's hard to know exactly what happened there and who really instigated one or the other. But you're right, he's very Christ-like right up until the end when he's like puts his arms out and he starts floating.
I suspect that is the writer kind of wrestling with his own guilt and like maybe a little bit reluctant to like kind of plant his flag and say like, actually I did the right thing. Is like I think he's probably responding to his own life and wanting to give those people kind of the benefit of the doubt in the way that, you know, I think especially now, like if this movie had been made 20 years ago, I think more people would have needed that to be the perspective and for it to be kind of seen through a more like, oh, but what does the straight woman feel about this? You know, and it's like now, and especially, you know, you and I are much more attuned to the gay character and wanting to see him actually just be truthful about who he is and want to see him like live his life as happily as possible. And it becomes a tragedy that, you know, that life has become impossible for him. But yeah, I sense that it's the writer, and that if this were something that he were writing now, that's something that would change. So I do think this movie has a few roots in a play that was written, you know, a while ago, and if it were written now, it would probably be updated in a couple of different ways. Especially with that daughter character, is like that daughter character does not feel like because she's a pretty rebellious girl. She feels like she would probably be pretty liberal in most senses, you know, like, yeah, I just get that sense from her character. But the way that she speaks in the movie is much more, you know, kind of judgmental and conservative. So I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between maybe when the character was written and when that character is being like now received in the movie form. Yeah, but also growing up in Idaho, I mean, I don't want to speak ill of Idaho. I've never been, but it seems like a very, very, like, I know it's a state that Donald Trump won handily. So that's all I'll say on that. But yeah, and if that character were on, you know, social media today, or, you know, it's just much more likely she would have gay friends or be exposed to gay people, you know, online or something. So I think she probably would be more tolerant now, but because the character was written, you know, 10 or so years ago, like I think she probably has some trappings of like how that character would have been, you know, in 2010 or 2012 versus how she would be today. Right. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I didn't really think very much about the power of the dog in relation to this movie or just that general thing. But I think I just love the tragic queer. I mean, I think I just have to come out and say that I love queer people dying as a narrative. Well, as they said, as Billy Eichner says in Bros, like, why do they only love us when we're miserable? True, but I think, to me, I connect so much with the pain that I mean, we're talking about this movie, so this character feels. You know, obviously not everything about this character. He's definitely much more forgiving of people than I would be.
Yeah.
And is living a completely different life. But I think just in general of like someone who is internalizing this shame that they are getting from you know, a much more heteronormative world. And I didn't really grow up religious at all, but I knew religious people, you know, and just in general, like that was in the background of my life. So just I know enough about what it feels like to be judged in this way that I connect a lot with the character. And so yeah, I guess I really like these tragic stories because I feel like they speak in kind of big, broad ways to these things that we are still dealing with. You know, things are kind of constantly improving, although also not sometimes taking a few steps backward as well. But in general, there still is like a big world out there, a big religious institution that calls gay people deviants and basically wants them to do what Charlie does in this movie and just, you know, basically like kill themselves. And I feel like this movie forces us to confront some of that. And I guess depending on how you feel about the movie, you know, you kind of feel differently, but I feel so much empathy for him that it's for me, it makes it just feel like such a tragedy that he's made to feel this way, and that I would hope that you know, other people who are watching it, you know, kind of feel the same way and you know, maybe consider their own judgments. And then that final moment, I don't know if we want to spoil the whole thing, but it's like there is a moment that I feel like I didn't really pick up on it the first time I watched this movie, but I saw it again today. And it really hit me hard today, actually, was that the kind of final moment of this movie is that there's kind of this like moment where he basically floats, you know, basically like has an exultant moment. And to me, what that said was that he actually was saved, that even though the movie is all about kind of the question of whether or not he's going to be saved, the missionary, you know, thinks his boyfriend went to hell because he was gay and killed himself, and also believes that Charlie, if he doesn't sort of repent, is going to end up the same way. And I feel like that final moment was kind of a statement that says actually like he is saved is a little bit too religious of a term for me, you know, but that he is sort of embraced in the end and loved in the end and has this kind of moment of glory in them, that he's basically not kind of damned because of who he is. And I actually found that to be kind of powerful in a way that I didn't even think about at all the first time I saw this movie.
I mean, I feel like if you look at it that way, though, too, like, again, the word "saved" is maybe a strong one, but if you're referring to it as if he's saved, then I don't know. That actually just makes me like it even less. I'm like, oh, so he just found Jesus. He had a big come to Jesus moment, and like, again, I know you're not saying necessarily that it was about Jesus, but that he found that maybe someone in that process, like she, you know, figured out how to love him or whatever. Maybe she saved her or whatever. But as someone who is vehemently anti-religion, I find that even more sort of an eye-rolly sort of. No offense to you, that it's just if that's what he's going for, again, like another more eye-rolly than ever, like especially in this movie that where the character repeatedly is saying like, I don't need this. I don't need you to talk to me about like this religion and Jesus and everything else. But throughout all of that, he maintains this like people are incredible. Like, so his faith has always been in people, not in some, you know, unknown deity or God or whatever you want to call it. And so the idea that at the end, if that's what it's supposed to be happening, it's like, well, that just flies in the face of the whole thing to me.
Yeah, I guess I don't mean it. I mean, I obviously use a lot of religious words, but I didn't necessarily mean it like saved by God or going to heaven. But if you're someone who believes in that like that's what that ending means. But if you're not, it sort of means that it's more just like a moment of triumph. Like obviously the movie would never end this way, but if you saw him like sinking into the floor and into like some fiery pit, that would, you know, signal that this character is getting some kind of dark ending. And I think instead it gives him this sort of light ending, and it says something good for him, and that whatever that is, you know, up to you if you know, believe in an afterlife or don't, or, you know, it could also represent just sort of a moment of clarity or, you know, positivity, but in some way that it answers the question of like, does this character deserve suffering or does he deserve a lightness? And I think the movie answers that question, whether or not it's necessarily religious or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see that. No, I see what you're saying. And like I said, I know you weren't speaking strictly religiously. But that was just, like I said, that was my take, my reaction.
No, I'm glad you had it, because I realized like how much that sounded like I was sort of, you know, giving a more religious ending than I actually.
Well, I mean, he made a movie about Noah and Noah's Ark, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know his personal life or his religion, but it seems like he
engages with the religion a lot, and so
Yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me if that was sort of his intent, was that it was sort of like a God has answered and is taking you up to heaven. But
Yeah.
you know,
I
that
can also
doesn't
see
really-
it. I think I kind of like it as a moment between the two of them where they kind of finally come to an understanding with each other, where she's finally like, she's reading him the thing and like she understands why he needs to hear it, and he gets a lot out of hearing her say it. And so that's the moment where they kind of learn that from each other, and then I think he passes away.
Yeah, I hate her character so much, but I like to think that maybe this final moment is what actually turns her around and makes her a better person, so that maybe he does eventually become right, because I think he's wrong about her up until now. I think she's pretty evil. Pretty
Yeah.
much a bad person, pretty much a lost cause, not someone I would give a bunch of money to and expect her to, like, you know, use it for college or to start a business or something like that. I think she's probably gonna, you know, squander it and, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But I like to think that maybe this encounter is what finally gets through to her, and that moment I think does kind of represent not just for him like sort of an ending, but also maybe a moment of enlightenment for her, where she kind of sees that, forgives her father and kind of sees him as a full-on human being, and then maybe takes that and stops being such a terror to people after this movie ends.
Yeah. We mentioned her, I think, before we started recording, and I wanted to make sure on recording we did mention Samantha Morton, who shows up for easily the best scene in the movie, and then just leaves. But again, you know, it's always nice to see her. She's fantastic. I think you did mention her because you were saying about talking about actors that had kind of a heyday. But I did want to circle back and give her major props because I've been a fan for years. So
for sure, she actually does that in She Said this year too. She's like the best scene in that movie, which it's not a movie I was particularly fond of, but her scene was good. And in this movie, I agree with you. I think it's the best scene in the movie, and I think it's easier to understand her judgment as someone who is like the partner of this man and then eventually got replaced by his boyfriend. I think it's easier to understand like how that would cause her to be angry at him. And also she seems a little bit more tolerant of him than the daughter, and a little bit more supportive, you know, and I feel like they have a really nice divorced parents relationship that feels real to me, and that they like have tenderness for each other, but they're also a little bit bitter at each other. And yeah, it's just a really nicely performed scene. So I think, I mean, she's one of my favorite supporting performances of the year, and she's only in that one scene, which is I would say under 10 minutes long in the
Yeah.
movie, but yeah, I think she brings a lot to this and really fills out like the backstory that I think without her appearance, you would be left with a lot of questions about what his life was like before.
Yeah.
This
I think
time.
they have a good relationship in that scene, but they say in that scene that like she's never been to that house before, and she hasn't. And he's like, well, that was the first time we were together in 8 or 9 years. So it seems like they haven't seen each other in a long time, and then this is the first time or one of a few times since then. And yeah, their dynamic in that scene is really good, but it also makes, to me, like opens more questions. It's like, well, why did she wait so long to come and have this conversation? Like what, and I don't even want to get into like, because I understand too, it's a fable, but in a plot sense, it's like, boy, it sure is convenient that all of these people showed up on the same day with 7 days for him to live. Like the missionary, and obviously the mom. So the mom like shows up because the daughter has shown up and has made her presence known. So she shows up later. But for those two to show up one right after another, it's like, again, I know it's like a fable and these things happen in fables, but also like, okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there are a lot of contrivances in the plot, mostly based on it being a play, where obviously you have to have everyone come to your set. You can't like gallivant around into a bunch of different sets. But that maybe, if I were adapting it to a movie, I might think about like, obviously he's too big really to leave, obviously, his apartment. So I think it makes more sense why people are coming to him. But yeah, it also makes it feel clear that this was based on a play, and it does stretch credulity a couple of times, especially with the daughter. Because her character is so like, I don't want to be here like all the time, and it's like, but you keep coming back every single day. So it feels a little bit like there are a lot of concessions being made just to get people to keep coming in and keep the story going over this week.
Well, thanks again for hopping on. Again, always a great talk. Where can we find you on social media?
The best place is just Letterboxd, at Real Nobody, REAL Nobody. And that, if I post to Twitter, it's usually just a review from there or something. So that's where I am these days. And I'm also on the When We Were Young podcast, which we cover 80s and 90s pop culture, a lot of movies on there. So our most recent episode will probably be The Karate Kid by the time that this is out, or if not, then it'll be coming very soon. So if you're into The Karate Kid or other 80s and 90s pop culture, you can check us out there.
Do you do all of the Karate Kid movies? Or are you just doing...
No. Often we do talk about the sequels, but in this one we just did the first one because there are 4 of the originals and then the remake, and then I was like, it sounds like they really just go downhill. So I had never seen any of them, so watching the first one alone was kind of already a momentous occasion.
That's fun. I grew up with them on VHS, so I've seen them. I'm very familiar with the first 3. But again, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, and you can find me Letterboxd and Instagram at So Brian Rowe. That's Brian with an I, ROWE. And you can find the podcast at Piece of Pie Pod on Instagram, and no longer Twitter, but also on YouTube. And I'm trying to get some more stuff posted to YouTube in my spare time. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, and make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss our Oscar episode, which is coming up. And our very next episode, we're talking Bros and Fire Island. It's a pairing with my friends Rob and Lauren, so you'll make sure you don't miss that. Thanks so much for listening. Give us a like, give us a follow, and go see a movie this weekend. We'll see you next time.